Thank you all so much for spending your time with me. I realize that the title I've given to my presentation is slightly different than the one you saw in the program. I realized as I was preparing my presentation that to really be able to get into resistance to the church industrial complex, we need to first understand how, at least I believe, this system is operating. So I'm going to focus a little less on the resistance aspect in this particular presentation, but I do hope in my longer paper that I can really expound more on that. But for today, I'm going to do something slightly smaller, slightly more perhaps realistic given our time frame, to just introduce this concept of church industrial complex. And yes, just to name as well that I am on Ohlone land in what is colonially known as Berkeley, California, United States. But I do also teach at St. Stephen's College on Treaty 6 territory in a nation colonially known as Canada, where I am a Euro-Canadian settler, is how I identify. So thank you. Let me begin. What is an industrial complex? So this term may be familiar to some, but I realize it may not be familiar to all. This is a socioeconomic term that explains how business interests and profit motivations can become entwined in various social and institutional systems. So often this profit motivation can undermine the stated, perhaps even the dominant mission of that organization. So often even financial interests gain most when that mission is not achieved. So we can see some of the inherent tension in this concept. The term was first used by US President Dwight Eisenhower in 1961, he first used the term military industrial complex, and the theorizing around this term originated first with this aspect of industrial complex, but it has since expanded quite significantly. Eisenhower was noting in his use of this concept that the defense industry's financial gain was corrupting government officials in the interest of making and perpetuating war because of these war-related industries that had much to gain to be in a state of perpetual war. He also, it's interesting to note that in the original version of his speech, not the speech he gave, but the one he had originally written, he had planned to use the phrase military industrial academic complex to highlight the role also played by academia in this particular system, so that the academic institutions were also being shaped and reshaped to support these war interests and ultimately the financial gain of military industries. So today we can see theorizing, and you may be familiar with this, so I apologize if this is already common knowledge to you, but a lot of great theorizing has been done around the prison industrial complex, the healthcare industrial complex, nonprofit industrial complex, and so forth. So perhaps I'll just share a little bit more of an example just to make sure that this concept is understandable to you. For prisons, I mean, we can certainly critique even the stated mission of prisons, but they're often understood to serve a role that can be punitive, corrective, protective, and so forth. And we can certainly critique those stated missions, and that certainly can and should and has been done by many scholars. But the aspect of industrial complex around the prison system shows that as financial interests predominate, even these original missions become secondary to the ultimate goal of minimizing expenses in order to maximize profits. So how does that work in a system like a prison? We could see that in cutting any kind of programs, even minimizing the amount that's spent on, security officers, staffing, and to maximize those prison populations. So to increase sentences or to increase the carceral system overall, increase what is criminalized in society, whatever can be done in order to increase that prison population. And because of the privatized interests that gain from those populations, that there's much more to gain from having more people in prison for those interests. So even though the stated mission might be to protect society, or it might be to, punish offenders or reform them, we can see how perhaps even some of these cost-cutting or profit increasing mechanisms might actually undermine those stated objectives, which again, of course, as I said, can be critiqued. So we can see how in various fields, if sometimes, if society were to be fully sort of quote unquote safe, if people were fully reformed, if that mission was achieved by prisons, there wouldn't be, people to imprison, and there wouldn't be as much money to be made. So anyway, just to lay that out as a bit of an example for how that this concept has been theorized with respect to a different industry. But now to bring it into the context, our context today, to focus on the church industrial complex. Well, first of all, how do we know that profit is undermining the stated objectives or the mission if we don't even know what the mission is? And I mean, of course, there are so many different understandings, as you all well know, that the mission of the church, there are many varied understandings of what that is. However, generally, profit is not one of those stated missions, at least. And so we can see how profit motivation, it could relate to a specific person or organization that is striving to increase returns for their own benefit. And I think this is where the critique of business interests in churches often, perhaps often lies, and it's rightfully so. But I think that's maybe a more limited understanding. So we could see an example of someone like a televangelist who, for their own personal gain, is seeking to create and recreate churches and religious practices and spiritual institutions such that individual gain will be achieved. But also we can see it more generally with relationship to how a business mindset can shape our assumptions of what is valued, what is the objective of church, what is considered success. And so this can really, this more general sense of how a church industrial complex can be operational, we can see that in a whole variety of ways, such as focusing on the desires of the largest givers to church. So such that to increase their desire to give by focusing on their interests. And of course, that means not focusing on the interests of more marginalized givers or those who are not givers at all. We can also see that in minimizing expenses. So which ministries, even within a church or denomination and so forth, are prioritized. And often those are the ones that are going to be seen to increase more, increase returns, and the aspects that are more likely to be cut or reduced are those perhaps such as outreach work, service to the community, service to various populations where it's not seen to be as likely to generate revenue. So we can see that as another way that this complex might play out. And I think that for my own research, I like to focus on, because I think it's perhaps a little bit more nefarious how this operates, but how even within progressive churches that have done great work, I have the World Council of Churches Agape statement here that has done, really excellent work on critiquing neoliberalism, critiquing colonialism, how even within those churches that have these great statements and great commitments to economic justice, when they approach their stewardship practices, I would say it's often within this framework of a church industrial complex of assuming that, the church is in competition with other organizations that might be recipients of donations, this idea that, business leaders, those with traditional financial expertise are most likely to, or are the best, those who are best equipped to be in this form of leadership. We can see how it's perhaps more subtle than in a situation that's so clearly about profit motivation, such as, a televangelist who very clearly is trying to profit materially from their church endeavor. We can see how even in a more sort of progressive church organization, where there is this work that's been done to at least, in terms of the preaching and the teaching, warn or caution against financial interests predominating, we can still see that when they approach their own budgeting financial practices, some of these very deep business-oriented assumptions are still a shaping force. I see that I'm getting towards my time, so perhaps I will just maybe should I wrap up, or can I do a little bit more? Sorry, I don't see the
You've
chat
got a
here.
few more minutes.
A few more minutes. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. I just saw
two more minutes, actually,
more minutes.
but you can
Okay.
take 3.
Okay, perfect. I'll just say a little bit more. Thank you, Beverly, for that. I have again, different screen set up, so I couldn't quite see the time there. But just to share one example, this is a book written about Christian stewardship practices, actually by some, I believe, Methodist authors who speak about, what to do, how to prioritize funding in churches. And they make this statement that youth are the future of someone else's church, not yours. Most of them will grow up and move on to some other city. So I think we can really, in this one little statement, in this one little book, see how something that, perhaps on the surface doesn't necessarily seem to really scream church industrial complex in this, they're not sort of saying, explicitly that churches should be trying to create as much profit as possible. But I think we can see embedded in statements like this idea that ministry success is defined by the revenue that's generated, that those who don't contribute much, for example, the youth, are not really to be prioritized in terms of the ministry. We can see this recommendation to focus on the certain ministries that will increase revenue to the congregation. So in another part of the book, they talk about, if your church is going through a hard time, you should, increase the programming that is most likely to bring in more revenue. And this is just one example of what they say is an aspect of ministry that can be cut if cuts need to be made. And also, I think in this too, we can see this idea that churches are somewhat in competition with each other, because it's, it's sort of saying, oh, churches, youth will grow up and they might attend a different church in the future, but that's benefiting another church. And we want, churches should be focusing on their own survival and their own needs, and this very, very internal sort of definition of what the focus of church life and church finance should be. So perhaps I will just leave it there with some area for further research, just to say that I think that this concept and the work, the great theorizing that's been done around in different industrial complexes needs to be applied to churches, and that this work is so important, and the resistance already exists, especially in churches in the global South and in marginalized contexts in the global North as well, that their alternatives do exist, and particularly those of us with privilege need to hear those voices. So I'll just stop there for right now. Thank you very much.
Okay, now coming to Sheryl. Yeah, I see the connectivity between the translation of the Bible and also the what is your term, church industrial complex. So Sheryl also make it clear how much donations and funding are important and needed for the Bible translators. But the thing is, when people give donations, and some people are giving more inputs in terms of finance, the church, the action which we found in the church is people who give more donations to the church, people who give more offering to the church are getting position in the ministry more. And many people doesn't know the source of income of those people who are contributing to the church. They could have get their money through smuggling or some other kind of unfair means. We don't know. But the thing is, the people's critique about those donors is in my place, we don't know their source of income. It could be from the corrupted money. And the church accept the money, and the church also promoted those who are giving the offering and the money to the church, giving the position like church elder or use them as a Bible reader. But those people, those who are giving more money, are not the regular church goers also. When it comes to the people who hardly come to the church and whose spiritual life also when people judge is not so sound, that when they come to the church giving donation and getting high positions in the ministry, then people grumble against them. So this is the thing which I have concern in relation to the industrial complex, beyond the church industrial complex congregation embodying economic liberation. Yes, economic liberation is needed, but see, in the church, there are many people who are very faithful in attending the worship services, and those are the people who are searching the spiritual food through the church worship. But their names are not heard. And when the church publishes the yearly record of the offerings and donations given to the church, So such people were at the lowest list, and they have insecurity feeling also, because our offering has been known by the whole church, by the whole congregation members, and those who are giving less have inferiority complex. Oh, my offering is this much. So this can be another kind of burden for the members of the church, especially people who are having lower income. So in this, with these regards, I think we really need to look into the subject of liberation in terms of financial within our own smaller section of congregations. So I think, and I believe that in every church, there are people who are having high salary and or high income people and low income people. When it comes to the ministry of the church, I think we need to see people who are having low income, because they are the one who are faithful to the church and the worship. They're the one who wants to gain spiritual gain, who wants to eat spiritual food from the worship. And another thing is, like, when the church is giving so much importance to financial matters, we need to see the spiritual side, because the church and the mission is not just building a big church or promoting any kind of thing, and like we are commodifying even the Bible and the God words, and so everything we transformed it into commodifying, selling object and selling material. At this point also, I think like we should stick to the spirituality, like through this people will gain hope of life, hope of better life, or hope of life after death, or people will get over their depression, people get over their anxiety, and such kind of thing. Even if we promote finance matters, like at the same time we should not forget about the spiritual side of the our church members. These are the concerns which I have to the presentations, and I'm also very delighted once again. Thank you for the time.